taking longer than usual. Yeah, we'll get started. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, we're live on Rockfin now. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. It's been a while since we've done a panel discussion, but it's awesome to start this out with some new friends here that I've been on the show for the first time. We have here Kamali Rose and Robert Durden. It's awesome to have you guys on here. You guys read the title. We're going to talk about the Facebook whistleblower story. We're going to talk about the Hollywood strike, how that's a historical thing. And we're also going to talk about some mandates, and we'll talk about some other issues too. But yeah, go right ahead. We can start with Kamali. How's it going, brother?
Going well, going well. Thank you so much for having me on, Franco. We've had the pleasure of interacting on other, channels and shows before, but glad to, join you here for the first time. So really appreciate you having me on.
And Robert Durden, how's it going?
It's going well, brother. Such a pleasure to be here. I've been excited to join you guys all day long, so this should be a fun discussion.
Yep. So let's get started. Since it's your first time on the show, you guys want to talk about your channels a little bit, like how you got started, give some background about like the goals and the ideology and all that. We can start with Kamali. What's the name of your channel and what's it all about?
Yeah, my channel is the Radical Democracy channel. It's Radical Democracy Show on right now on YouTube and Twitch, and it is focused on really advocating for workplace democracy. And I'm a strong advocate, staunch advocate of democratic consensus as a model for democracy. And I like to cover, I do political commentary, like to cover labor, rights and labor issues, as well as just, whatever's going on, news of the day stuff as well. We try to have some guests on, so-called experts in different fields, and just everyday folks from our audience and folks like that as well, just to get a wide, voice from the people as well. And so, yeah, I've been doing that for a little over about a year and a half, almost, about a year and a half now. And I really started out of, I used to, I'm a software engineer by profession, but that work feels sometimes, a little parasitic of a force on our society. And so I like to try to balance that out with doing some real good for the world by trying to focus on everyday issues. I started out in just being like a political activist and, helping volunteer for the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's really what kind of propelled me into this spot. Of course, Bernie Sanders has, by and large, let most of us leftists down at this stage, but that's what got me into it. Done a little bit of political organizing that way and activism, and then once the pandemic hit, wanted to continue, doing that work some way safe, and so sparked up the channel and been here ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a very similar story to all that. But yeah, I'm glad to see a lot of the new people that are starting out are both activists and commentators, and even some of them do some writing and some journalism. Robert, you want to talk about your channel a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I started my channel back at the end of last year, I think, December-ish. And I'm a chiropractor by trade. I quit my job in November because of COVID, and I was afraid to get infected. That was pre-vaccine and all that stuff. So I was terrified, and I had like a little mental breakdown and quit. Ended up doing this. And the idea behind my channel, which I call Political Fight Club, is like I wanted to create like the most like rudimentary YouTube style channel where people could get on and basically just like bitch about politicians that they don't like, complain about other people that are in my case, like in the lefty YouTube sphere. And the idea behind it was to try to get as many people as I can to just like do what I do, which is basically get on. It feels good to kind of yell into a mic about politics. But beyond that, if you follow a certain like guidelines in terms of like your political discussion, we get away from things like straw manning each other and gaslighting each other, and we keep the debate on topic. Call out people that are doing bad work when they are wrong on the substance, while simultaneously boosting everybody that does good work. So if you've seen my channel, like I do my power rankings where I will always like boost people that are doing particularly good work recently and say, everybody, look, go check out this vid, go check out this article, and then sub to their YouTube channel, while simultaneously, like I'll go after people savagely when they're wrong on the substance. I don't know if you guys have seen some of my diss tracks, but what I try to do is like be sort of a catalyst that helps people get into the lefty YouTube sphere, but also help us kind of create this big old hive mind network that self-corrects while also self-boosting. So, what I wanted to prove to people is like you can have a decent sized YouTube channel without all the bells and whistles if you just like spit truth and try to help people correct along the way. Like you guys know, I'll savage TYT, but I'll go really calm when I see someone else like the Vanguard had a pretty bad ivermectin take recently. So I also went after them, but only briefly, just to correct them on the substance. So that's kind of the idea behind it, is just trying to get people on board with yelling into a mic. Let's get angry at these politicians together, and also self-correct along the way as an entity, a very large collection of channels. So that's the kind of the idea behind what I do.
Yeah, my audience knows I do a lot of yelling on this channel.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're tempered.
I think we're three yellers in the building here, so
I yell at politicians when I'm just confront them. But yeah, on this channel it's pretty like mellowed out. But yeah, let's talk about the first topic here. Let me share the screen here. Facebook was down, WhatsApp was down. What else did we have down? Instagram. And there was a whistleblower that came out around the same time, and we'll look at this Ben Norton tweet later on. But this is on a CNN article talking about this. I can't even look at the title because they're trying to advertise everything. Key things the Facebook whistleblower told the Senate panel. So she was talking about how there was studies showing that Facebook and social media affects teens' mental health, and that Facebook knew about this. So she said, I am here today because I believe that Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. She said during her opening remarks, the company's leadership knows how to make Facebook and Instagram safer, but won't make the necessary changes because they have put their astronomical profits before people. That sounds like a really anti-establishment thing to say. And then she says, congressional action is needed. They won't solve this crisis without your help. So what she is advocating for is for censorship. And she's using this anti-establishment language by saying, oh, like, this is dangerous. It's affecting the kids. They're putting profit before people. But, I mean, who's going to control the narrative? Like, we saw what was going on during Russiagate when they were trying to take down stories that were criticizing the Russiagate narrative. We see what they're doing now with stories about ivermectin, and we've seen that journals like the Rolling Stone were wrong about people waiting outside in lines, saying that there were gunshot wounds waiting outside of lines to get their because there were people that were being treated because they took horse paste, ivermectin, which clearly it's not just horse paste. It's been used for decades. It's won Nobel Peace Prizes. And it's in countries like Peru, where my family's at. It's saved a lot of my family members' lives. But, I mean, what's going to happen to that misinformation? Right? So I want to hear what your take is on this, Kamali and Robert. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll jump in. First and foremost, I mean, she says that, like, the Facebook, the way that their algorithms are working are affecting people's, mental health. Capitalism is also something that affects people's mental health, and she's got nothing to say about that. So, always with them, the same thing. I think that, as far as the ivermectin conversation is concerned, I don't know. I'm not informed enough about it to have a take one way or the other. People that I trust, some journalists that I trust, Katie Halper, Matt Taibbi, have spoken on it and, had folks on their shows and that have said, and shown that in other countries this is being used. And also on the topic of, like, animal, I do hate the narrative of, like, this is horse,
paste,
deworming, like thing, because there are plenty of medications that are used by both humans and animals. I used to take a medication for anti-anxiety because of the toll that capitalism took on me, and it's called gabapentin, and they give that to animals all the time. It's used, if a cat has a procedure coming up, they can be really unruly, they give them some gabapentin to calm them down. for the procedure. So it's an anti-anxiety med. You know, it would be like them trying to frame that way. But of course, you know, they got the right people in right places, and it benefits them and their donors, I'm sure. So they have nothing to say about that. So, you know, as far as her whistleblowing, it came across, you know, and I saw reports out actually. I think Nico House from MCSC had been on, I believe, RT, and he was talking about how you know, like Jen Psaki worked for the company that was doing, you know, that this whistleblower went to as a PR firm essentially. And I think that with that, as I was reading all of her statements, I just kept on, before I knew any of that, I just kept on saying, wow, this sounds like, you know, somebody out of the US government was writing this for her. You know, it was like everything that they could want was like hand delivered up, you know. And she sprinkled in a little bit of like the anti-establishment, you know, like rhetoric, just a teeny bit, you know, so that it kind of throws some folks off. But by and large, it was all, you know, pro-establishment, you know, U.S. imperialism was one of the themes that I really caught a thread on throughout her statement. She talked about how, you know, she worked inside this like counter espionage department inside of Facebook, and it's like, you know, what the hell is Facebook doing having a, you know, why is any private capitalist, you know, institution concerning themselves with trying to do, you know, counter espionage work? You know, that's
Right.
reeks of coordination with, you know, U.S. government forces like FBI, CIA. We all know that they did coordinate with them on things like, you know, allowing FBI access to so-called Black identity extremists. You know, once they identify folks as that, and so, you know, they work with the U.S. government agencies. She had nothing to say, no sort of commentary on the U.S. You know, government's role and private corporations' role in censorship and authoritarianism. She talked about you know, is this being used by authoritarian, you know, governments and authoritarian forces? She says, you know, yes, and uses examples like China and Iran. This is straight up U.S. imperialist propaganda that they're doing right now, you know, to try. Those are the folks that the U.S. sees as a, you know, a threat in one way or another. They want to ramp up their, you know, whatever they're doing, you know, over there that we go sight unseen. And she even had, you know, Senator Richard Blumenthal in on it, you know, like talking about how, you know, oh, this is a national security issue here. And they always want to frame it that way because, of course, Richard Blumenthal sits on the Armed Services Committee, which controls the U.S. military budget, which we know even after just ending the you know, biggest war that we're involved in, they increased the U.S. military budget by $25 billion, even though Joe Biden just asked to keep it the same. You'd think it would go down when you end your largest war, but no. There are contractors, military contractors, to be paid. That military industrial complex has to keep going. And so, yeah, the idea of having a private institution be concerned with censorship, I just think is the absolute wrong direction to be going in. I do think that there are, you know, it's a complex space, but I do not think the solution in any way, shape, or form is to allow, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and his cronies to decide what is information versus misinformation. Do we really trust those people to do that? We see what our, you know, our media institutions are already capable of, and they have higher standards that they're upheld to as, you know, publishers and journalists even. And we still saw, you know, weapons of mass destruction and all this kind of BS. So really, who's to decide what is information versus misinformation? I think that what we need to do is, you know, to further try to democratize these platforms, and to, you know, and never allow any sort of centralized body to be the decider over, you know, the ministry of truth over here, in a very Orwellian sort of fashion. So those are just some of my thoughts. I have a whole lot more, but I'll let Robert you know, jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
No, I agree with everything you're saying there. I don't know what the solution is. I would love to see these things that are monopolies turn into some sort of like social utility and be regulated as thus. You know, you don't, as Jimmy Dore says, you know, if you regulate it like the telephone, you can't censor people for what they say on the phone. So I agree 100%. I don't know what the solution is, but that's what I'd like to see. Now, as far as the whole like Facebook going down for a day, and also, you know, what that woman was testifying to the Senate about, and in terms of what she said on 60 Minutes, it feels like almost like Facebook planted their own whistleblower in a way. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it almost looks like they're trying to manufacture consent for Facebook essentially to move. Have you guys heard of Section 230? Basically, They've been lobbying for Section 230 for a while, which basically says that the government would regulate them in terms of what their content curbing, what is considered extremist content, and what have you, right? Now, there's two reasons that they would do this, and Glenn Greenwald and Caitlin Johnstone were talking about this on Twitter earlier. One, if they do this and they push for, the government to kind of regulate what Facebook can and can't say, what it'll end up doing is it's so expensive to deal with like complying with those government regulations in terms of your content that it would effectively make it impossible to compete with Facebook forever. And then the other thing that it would do is these people are thick as thieves. The people that own Facebook, the elites, along with the politicians, it allows them to kind of usher in censorship in a weird way under the guise of, oh, well, we don't want too much extremist content on Facebook. We don't want there to be like this enormous profit motive that makes them build an algorithm, as they did in 2018, around inflammatory content just so they can get people to engage more in Facebook, which was having a hard time getting people to engage at the time. So what they're doing is, in a weird way, is they're allowing censorship to kind of like sneak in the back door via this. And that's why they've been lobbying for this for the longest time. And I'm not an expert in any way, but of course I don't like this idea one bit of like the government deciding, oh, well, this stuff is so inflammatory, so arbitrarily, so therefore we must either censor or completely suppress this fringe content, because as you guys know, that's us. Yeah. That's anybody who's telling the truth on these things. And as far as the ivermectin and the vaccine misinformation stuff, a lot of that sort of suppression of valuable medical information. Remember, I have a background in medicine, so I've done my research on ivermectin. I know a lot about these things. I believe that there's a profit motive in suppressing good information on ivermectin, because ivermectin costs nothing, is effective, and the patent from Merck has expired, so it can't be made money off of. So Big Pharma stands to lose tremendous amount of money from their other things like monoclonal antibody therapy, which is Regeneron, right? Costs $1,500 per treatment, right? But ivermectin costs $2 for a 5-day regimen. They stand to lose billions by running interference and controlling the information that comes out about alternative treatments for COVID, especially as it gets worse this winter. So, that's a lot. I know I, kind of ramble there for a little bit, but basically I don't like this one bit. And I don't know if the blackout with Facebook, I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I don't know if there's any evidence that says that these two things, that the lady speaking to the Senate and going on 60 Minutes, and then the subsequent like blackout at Facebook that went down because of their servers, I don't know if there's anything connected there. I really don't. But we'll find out. We have to be hyper vigilant, because we really don't want censorship being snuck in through the back door. And we know Joe Biden, that's like one of his highest priorities, is highly censored, highly policified state. So,
well, we can say for sure, since they coincided, there were a lot of eyes on the story. But everything else is up to just us speculating.
And that might be the reason they did it. If it turns out that the blackout was only a way to shed, most everybody's on Facebook, so they'll all be focusing on it. Then if you want to really shine the world's biggest spotlight on that lady's testimony in the Senate and 60 Minutes, you have Facebook go down for a couple of hours, and suddenly it's national news. And then you're manufacturing consent for censorship.
I wanted to bring this up because this is something that I was going to discuss on the Vanguard, but we didn't get to the ivermectin discussion. I didn't get to talk about this in one of my Rockfin exclusive live streams, but Pfizer initiates phase 1 study of a novel oral antiviral therapeutic agent against SARS-CoV-2. This is a a protease inhibitor, right? And that's essentially the same thing as ivermectin. It's a protease inhibitor. So Pfizer is developing their own ivermectin treatment. So then you wonder why they're trying to demonize something that they're not going to be profiting off of, and instead they're trying to rip it off and make it their own so that they can make a profit off of it.
They've been doing this with weed forever. Marinol. You add a hydroxide group to one of these formulas, and then technically it can be patented again.
And can you imagine if, let's say, and I brought this up to all the people that are pro-censorship, saying, oh, but we need to protect against medical misinformation. Can you imagine if they were doing this for marijuana? Like, what's the mainstream narrative right now for marijuana? I say that, oh, there's not enough information out, it's bad. And there has been a history of the U.S. Censoring information about marijuana. So can you imagine all these people that are being pro-censorship right now?
Like, and not just marijuana, but things like, psilocybin, MDMA as well, which
shrooms,
are just now starting to enter into it as they get a hold on it and can start to find a way and, determine plans for how they can profit off of it. Of course, we saw that with marijuana. The same companies that fought against it for decades, they fought to keep it illegal so that because they know if you have this plant that you can grow in your own, house or your own backyard, there's no way for them to profit off of that. I'm Rastafarian. I've grown hundreds of pounds of weed in my lifetime. In Jamaica, lived in Jamaica for some time, and saw even there, what it's like and how the police handle it. And they're always looking to just, find a way to profit, of course. And so these companies, there's studies happening right now on psilocybin that shows that one single dose of psilocybin can treat depression for months. I've had an experience like that personally. I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but I have had an experience like that personally, where I tripped on shrooms, and I really did feel I believe that it really opened my eyes up in a way of a feeling of connectedness to the world, and really shifted my views, my political views, very far to the left, very fast. And so I think that they are very afraid of, anything like that can stand to disrupt their, daily, once a day antidepressants that they would love to get everybody on and keep everybody on.
It's a nail in the coffin. Well, it's a nail in the coffin for Big Pharma. Like, if people start realizing that holistic medication, this is what I talked about yesterday with Sky Daddy, like holistic medication, and how they demonize a lot of doctors that promote holistic medication. The establishment doesn't want people to realize that. They don't want us to be growing our own food either.
Absolutely.
And how dieting can improve our mental health. But I also wanted to point out something that she was saying about how, there's too many extreme views on Facebook. They want us to avoid having conversations instead of learning how to have conversations and coming to an understanding with people that we disagree with, right? Like, they want, like, when we come to the dinner table, like, what do our older generations tell us? Like, oh, try to avoid having those conversations and blah, blah. Because that's what's been indoctrinated into them. For us to not have conversations with people that we disagree with, like, oh no, you're just crazy, and to just avoid it. They want to keep us divided. That's why they indoctrinate that stuff into us. But we should be learning to be patient and having these conversations with people that we disagree with, so that we can come to an understanding, not coming to an agreement right away, but that's planting seeds and us figuring out how we have a lot more in common than we initially thought. But I also wanted to point out, before I get to this, I want to give some shout outs first to some people who I thought made great points. Here's Fiorella Isabel said, the Facebook whistleblower promoted by mainstream media as a hero for exposing things we already knew about social media is advocating for more censorship and stoppage of misinformation by the same social media platforms already working with the government to sell establishment narratives. No. And I want to say Facebook and Google are one with the government. They were funded by the government, and their origins are pretty sketchy. Without the CIA, without the intelligence community, there would be no Silicon Valley, there would be no Google, there would be no Amazon. And I talked about this on my show with Red Economics and Mana Talk a couple months ago, this Whitney Webb article talking about the origins of Facebook, how it's tied to the military, Facebook's growing role in the ever-expanding surveillance and pre-crime apparatus of the national security state demands new scrutiny of the company's origins and its products as they relate to a former controversial DARPA-run surveillance program that was essentially analogous to what is currently the world's largest social network. This is scary. They have records of us and like our conversations, what we post, who we interact with. And Facebook has been, a proud partner with the government in trying to manufacture consent for things like the Arab Spring. Kamali brought up Nico House's segment when he was discussing this, right? So, what more will they try to censor, right? Trying to censor information that will make the U.S. look bad, and to try to get us to support them when we go to these wars and try to implement, these coups in those countries so that we can obtain resources from other countries. But what's your take on all this, guys?
I mean, I think that we should be very cautious of any sort of, and this is something to do with, when we talk about like, free software, one of the things is that we really got to look at, and, and I know we're all, everybody's broke, we're struggling. We got to address the root problem of that and get people paid properly, get their wages to match their productivity. We got to do, the only way we're ever going to do that is by, ending capitalist structures that, have a handful of people, hoarding the surplus of everyone else's labor, and we need to build more work cooperatives so that we can control that surplus of labor. Look at any society, any economic system, and society. Whoever controls the surplus of labor controls the society. In monarchy, it was the kings and queens controlled the surplus of their subjects' labor. In feudalism, the lords controlled the surplus of the serfs. In slavery, the masters controlled the surplus of the slaves. And in capitalism, the employers control the surplus of the employees. So we definitely need to look to that. And I think that as far as the sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Jump in, Robert.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying. To kind of build on what we were talking about, capitalism will always find a way to defeat or fight against something that is used to destroy it. And in our case, in America, I think a lot of the ways that we destroy it is simply by giving people correct information, which they never get from mainstream media. The smarter they become, the more awake they become, the more angry they become, and the more close we are to some sort of revolution in this country. And the capitalists understand that. And here's the thing. They're finding out day by day that they're having a really hard time transitioning from traditional media on television to online. People aren't picking up what they're laying down when you start putting CNN stuff online. They can promote it and put it on the most generous algorithm on the planet, but their views and their subs and their like to dislike ratio is nothing compared to some of the juggernaut independent lefty media sites, like, for instance, Jimmy Dore is one of them. So what they have to do is they can't beat us at getting out good and entertaining information. We are starting to corner the market online. So what they're trying to do instead is simply just block us from having any outlet whatsoever. So really what this is we have to, and this is part of the reason I love what the left is kind of doing already, which is proliferating and creating tons of smaller channels and boosting each other and pumping each other up. And we're cross-pollinating in a way where we're eventually going to have like this 3D network hive mind that will have more viewers and more subs than the mainstream media does, and we're just going to snuff them out. Now, my thing with Political Fight Club has always been like I think that CNN and MSNBC, they can do whatever they want to promote themselves and try to transition online, and nobody's going to buy it because you know what? The only people that watch those channels are over 60 and they don't know how to use the internet as well. So we get all of the people under the age of 60 generally. So what I'm trying to do is, with this huge network that we're building right now, all these little coalitions, and that goes from Fred Hampton Leftists, Mi Casa Su Casa Network, all these other networks. I heard possibly Jay from the Fred Hampton Leftists might be doing his own like separate network now called the Populist Voice Network. That's awesome. All of these people coming together, if we keep boosting each other, what we can do is snuff out the people that really carved out our niche to begin with, who have now gone completely capitalist, like TYT, like David Dole, Mike Figueredo with the Humanist Report, right? And their numbers are already showing this, right? Yeah. They have an immense amount, hundreds of thousands of subs, but some of these people can't conjure up a couple thousand views. Whereas you look at Sabby Sabs today, she has more views than some channels that have 100 or 1,000 times her subs. So what we need to do is the CNNs, MSNBCs, the Fox News, I don't see them transitioning well online. I want our big coalition kind of here, which is a decentralized network of a lot of smaller channels and groups of smaller channels to snuff out the TYTs and to make them go extinct. Because then what we would have is a sort of Marxian perfect co-opt of channels that are like unionizing with no real contract to snuff them out. And then after that, what we'll do is we will proliferate very good, entertaining information from there on out. And that's, again, I don't want to ramble too long, but I just think that what we need to do to get to really become impervious to censorship is have as many channels as we can speaking truth. They can't shut us all up, and if one person gets censored, the rest of us back them up and get them on the show, and then we throw the biggest stink in the world to make sure that their channel gets put back up. They can't take us all down, and if they do, then we will have some riots in the street. You could censor Jimmy Dore today and you'd probably have a minor riot on your hands.
They're afraid to do that. I was just having this conversation earlier with Nico. They are afraid to go after Jimmy Dore. And we saw recently YouTube put out a statement how, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, how they are going to go after medical misinformation channels. Jimmy Dore still doesn't have a single strike. And I think that if they do that, it's going to be a huge risk for them, because there's going to be massive outrage if a channel with almost 900,000 subscribers, not only that, but it's highly suppressed, and then it gets all those views, and if he gets shut down or if he gets a strike or anything, there's going to be so much outrage. Jimmy Dore, if his channel gets taken down, he can go on Joe Rogan and be like, hey, check out Rockfin or these other platforms that we should go on, and then he gets Joe Rogan to get onto Rockfin or to all these alternative media platforms. It's over for YouTube.
Yeah, you become impervious in a way. If you speak so much truth and you get a fan base that really loves you, then just the fact that you get censored could cause a huge spark and an uproar in a way that almost protects you in a way. So I'm all for just like spitfire. And the reason Jimmy Dore doesn't have any strikes is because he had Dr. Robert Malone on.
Yeah.
By the way, that was one of the best Jimmy Dore episodes, if not the best Jimmy Dore episode of all time. Robert Malone is exactly right on all the facts. Just take it from me. He's only talking about meta-analyses when he's referring to ivermectin and how the vaccine is very leaky and things like that. He's an expert.
Yeah, so protein shedding and all that. Yeah.
Right. The reason that he didn't get any strikes is because he's right on the data. And I haven't gotten any strikes either, even though I know I'm a smaller channel, but I've done multiple episodes on ivermectin. Yeah. But the thing is, I'm reading data to people and giving them like information based on my medical expertise, so they can't really come after me, because then I would just go on other people's channel and be like, they're censoring a doctor for something I learned in school.
They still did that. They still did that though. The channels like The Last American Vagabond, they gave Kim Iverson a strike. Yeah,
they'll come after.
They gave Nico House a strike, so they'll go after the smaller ones. And like I've had Dr. Robert Malone on months ago, but that was just a Rockfin exclusive one because I was afraid. It's like, I don't know, I'm not taking the risk. But Jimmy now is giving other people more confidence to talk about this now. But yeah, we'll see as it goes forward.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but it is scary. And the reason that they're even going after this stuff has nothing to do with actual facts. It has everything to do with that Big Pharma stands to make tens of billions of dollars, probably tens of billions per company that have these mRNA vaccines like Moderna and Pfizer. Yeah. If people understand that they have a very cheap alternative, right?
Yeah.
And you can't force people to get vaccines. I'm a doctor. Everybody has bodily autonomy. You can't force people to get vaccines. I'm 100% against mandates. But there's always going to be a percentage of our society that's against stuff like that, even if it is well researched. So, seeing as we're in America and that's the reality of things, ivermectin costs nothing, is good for treating, especially in terms of morbidity and mortality. Let's get the information out there that allows people to understand that there's an alternative that is not the vaccine. It's also not a $1,500 Regeneron course that you have an option with this winter when inevitably Delta variant gets worse and we have other variants emerge and stuff like that. So that's always what I've tried to do on my show, is just be like, listen, you guys, just understand your options. And here's the efficacy of the 63 current studies that exist on ivermectin with COVID. 58 of them show positive results, 92%. So you take that stat for what it's worth.
Yeah, and
I
I'll just jump in here because I think I have a slightly differing opinion on some of this at least. And again, I'm not a medical professional, but I am, I've worked in the healthcare field for, I spent about 5 years in there, not as a doctor, just as a lab assistant, a medical assistant. So nothing, I'm not in any kind of elite academic, position to speak on anything, but I am a civilian, right? And we're all civilians, and we all should have. And I agree with Robert and what Franco was saying as far as the issue. I think is that people deserve to have all the information, be able to weigh the information, and I think that the issue, I am somebody that I think that I agree with sort of, I think Richard Wolff's take on this essentially, and where he comes from with it. We mandate a lot of things in this society, and we mandate things that are tied to people's, to people's health, right? We mandate things like you cannot smoke cigarettes in public spaces, right? Because we realize through enough research and science, nobody is going to have the capability of being an expert in every field that is needed inside of a society this complex. Like nobody goes out there and says, I don't trust the experts on flying planes and decides to fly their own plane without learning how to fly a plane first. We all trust our pilots, right? We trust them. We put our lives in their hands. We mandate things like traffic lights, right? We say you got to stop on red, you got to slow down on yellow, because we realize that if you don't do that, then people would pull up to an intersection, would crash. You'd have all, we do it to protect our public health. We mandate licensing in this country, right? We say doctors have to have licenses, right? Drivers have to have licenses, because we want people to be able to trust to say, and yes, there are all kinds of, I think that the suspicion of mandates is a reasonable, rational position to take, right? It's reasonable, it's rational to be suspicious of mandates. It's reasonable, it's rational to be suspicious of big pharma and corporates and corporations mandating anything on us. I think that the suspicion is absolutely reasonable. I think the response to the suspicion is unfortunately not rational and reasonable, really. And I think the problem really stems from what we're talking about here, people not having enough sources of information. I think that the way that they rolled out things like the vaccine was really poorly done, right? They rushed it, and they rushed it because the initial response to the pandemic was so poor in this country in particular. Other countries have handled it much better. Look to New Zealand, Vietnam, China. I trust enough of the data that's coming out of those countries as well. I'm not I'm not this anti-China. I don't trust anything that comes out of China. I trust Chinese government just as much as I trust the U.S. government, which is to say not a whole lot, but I definitely trust scientists, other experts in these different fields, and I think that. I just want to say I understand the suspicion that people have. I'm Black in America. I'm very familiar with things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I'm familiar with how they've taken advantage of Black patients like Henrietta Lacks and using our cells to do things like that turned out to be a net positive, like help to create things like all these vaccines with her immortal cells. But and we've seen from pharma companies, right? We saw opioid epidemic. We saw, cigarettes and how they lied about knowing all the risks of that. We saw them lie even about, the Nestle company, about baby formula, versus breastfeeding. And so companies will lie about things that will impact our public health. Governments will lie. Their mandates are, have caused people harm sometimes. The real problem is, I think, in the real solution, I think, to this is not to say, okay, let's force things on people. Let's force these mandates or anything like that. But it's to try to better inform people, right? I don't think that I believe in, vaccination. I think that, the science of it, it's something that I am vaccinated. I encourage, friends, family to get vaccinated, because I do trust enough scientists have come out and have said, yes, these vaccines, they over time, they've definitely shown that they're particularly the Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson, their efficacy has waned over time. The Moderna is a little bit steadier and has held up, over 90%. Pfizer's down to in the 70s, high 70s, low 80s after just a few months, and people are talking about booster shots. They're doing this, of course, out of a profit motive, right? But the solution, I think, is not to distrust all scientists or the science or anything like that. I also think that we should hear the scientists out on ivermectin and these other solutions, but and let people decide and choose, but make sure that the public is informed. And so, but as far as, these vaccines are concerned, I think that the issue is they take public research, right? Most of the research that these companies used was public research, done in public institutions. They take that research, they socialize all the risk involved because it's not profitable to them to do that sort of research. So they take that public research, they take public tax dollars. We gave them billions of dollars. These companies, Moderna, Pfizer, got billions of dollars to manufacture these vaccines, and then they turn around and they again rush the process, and get that vaccine out too quickly without people. They should have been putting doctors and scientists and researchers, a wide swath, with all the opinions. Make sure it's just a fair random sampling of them. I don't believe in the sort of right-wing sort of fossil fuel company backed strategy of like, we're going to come out on something like climate change and bring one scientist that believes in climate change and one scientist that's against it, when really the reality is like 99% of peer-reviewed studies on climate change say, climate change is a problem, it's a man-made issue. We should bring enough, get a random sampling of doctors, of scientists, not just one government-approved Anthony Fauci, who has, investments in these companies that were, involved with the potential development of the virus itself. But people have lived with viruses for as long as viruses existed before humanity, and so we know that these things are coming around. They're going to come around again. There will be more viruses, and what we need to do is make sure that we're informing people. We're building institutions that people can trust, so that when they hear this information, they know that they can trust these institutions. And we gotta trust the people that we allow to specialize in it, but make sure that we're getting enough of them, putting them out there in front of the people, explaining the science behind it, telling why we should or should not be taking this or that, in using that as a solution. And so I really think that in removing the profit motive from our healthcare system, right? Just a total removal of profit motive from our healthcare. Why do we have any kind of profit motive when it comes to public health and healthcare? That should absolutely disappear. And so I think that with that, we would get rid of the concern about, these companies are just trying to make a buck, which we know damn well they are. They've done it a million times before, and they'll do it again. So it's totally reasonable to distrust them. But I do think that we do all kinds of things, and we should, as leftists, as social. I'm a socialist. I believe in community and community building, and we got to get together sometimes and do things and maybe put something in our body that's meant to, or do something, alter our body in a way that's intended to help not just ourselves but our community around us, right? Viruses don't give a damn about borders or anything like that. They spread around, so we want them. And honestly, I believe if these viruses, my personal take, just my analysis is that my frank analysis, see what I did there, is that if they were really some sort of like scam, these viruses, or some sort of population control mechanism, we'd see a lot more of the virus being the vaccine. I'm sorry, if these vaccines were some sort of population control mechanism or something like that, or a scam, I think that we'd see a lot more of them being distributed in the global south, which their numbers, they're not getting any of those. They would love to,
but they also don't want them in the global south because of the history of what's happened in these countries. Like when Bill Gates has tried to distribute the vaccines in those countries, the children suffered, and they had after adverse effects.
Getting vaccines from the Chinese vaccines.
Yeah, those are different though.
Of course,
and they don't have that same history with the U.S.
Of course, and that's what I'm saying. Like, not to necessarily say we should trust the U.S. company, and that's why we should be thinking about this in an internationalist approach, where the U.S. is not centered, where it's not some sort of American exceptionalism, to think that these companies are somehow special. But I do think that we should be able to, when we have publicly funded, publicly backed, publicly researched, publicly developed vaccines, that we would people would be more likely to trust those, and then to get vaccinated and to try to slow or stop the spread of this virus. More people have died from this than the 1918 flu, and we had much poorer healthcare system back then. And we've still handled this much worse and much lower population, and we still have handled this so much worse. So
proportionally though, it's like less than 0.05% the people that have passed away, and in our age group it's like less than it's like 0.00, like for me it was
Very
like
low.
0.0003.
0.0003, yeah.
And then for Zach, when I went on his show on the Vanguard, like I showed them the University of Oxford calculator to see what their chances are of dying from COVID, and for him it was 0.0001, So it was less than mine because he's a little bit younger than me. But I mean, we're seeing breakthrough cases now. They're in several countries, and now they're pushing for boosters, but the boosters only protect people from the alpha variant. And now we're seeing all these other variants coming out, and there's more studies coming out showing how natural immunity protects people from more variants than the vaccine does. The vaccines mainly protect people from the alpha variant. And this is why Dr. Robert Malone on Jimmy's show was saying we can't vaccinate our way out of this because the virus is just going to keep adapting. And the way that these vaccines are affecting us, especially the mRNA ones, is they're making us antibody dependent. There's also protein shedding. So it's not, and then it's waning off after a couple of months. So what's going to happen? They're going to give us the booster, which is only going to protect us from the alpha variant. They're like, oh man, people are still getting sick. We got to have more boosters. And as we're mixing all this with these experimental vaccines whose clinical trials won't end until 2023. So whenever a government is trying to mandate something on the people and the mainstream media is backing them, and they're nonstop talking about this, then I'm going to be skeptical. And then I'm also going to be looking at what all these experts that the mainstream media doesn't want to show and doesn't want to bring them on to talk about this, and they're cherry picking certain experts. I'm going to be skeptical about it, and I don't think that people should be losing their jobs just because they don't want to put something that they don't know how it'll affect their body. So I just want to ask this question for you guys.
I think we're totally in agreement there that I don't think anybody should be losing their job, but I do think that it is a reasonable thing to say, listen, if this is what we have, that we look at the case rate for hospitalizations, who's been hospitalized with COVID versus vaccinated people versus unvaccinated. The numbers that 99%, I think it was in June or July, it was 99% of all hospitalizations and deaths were unvaccinated people. So I believe in scientists for so many things. We believe in science on so many things, right? We believe in science on climate, the climate crisis, on all kinds, right? We go to doctors, right? They're just one form of scientists, right? We believe in them. We trust them to operate on us. Surgeons, that's science. Like we trust the science. We trust the specialists within those fields. And we have a highly specialized society because, ever since we moved out of essentially agrarian society, people have had to specialize. And I think that the issue is when we start to add in the private profit motive. That's when people get a healthy, reasonable skepticism. Like I said, I believe the skepticism is reasonable. It's totally rational to be skeptical given all the history that we've seen from big pharma, from the U.S. government in their mandates. And I don't believe I do believe people should lose certain jobs, but I believe only in a society where those people aren't now hung out to dry, are left in despair and destitution because they've lost those jobs. If we had a proper social safety net and you had healthcare professionals that were saying, I do not want to put this in my body, I refuse to get vaccinated, then I am totally fine with them, being dismissed, because I don't want, I want to be able to go into a space and feel safe when I get sick. I don't want to end up dying from COVID. I just got really sick with something else. But
in this case, these vaccines aren't like you can still get. Yeah, you can still get COVID.
You can still get it, but again, it's the hospitalization rate from it, and it's the rate of death out of it.
But most of the evidence showing the hospitalization rate, the ones showing significant difference are from months ago, when there was barely anybody who was getting vaccinated back in January and February.
Yeah, if I may. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, yeah, guys. I got a twofold answer, piggybacking off of things that you've both said over the last couple of minutes here. The first is Cuba. Let's talk about Cuba, right? You were talking about how there's always a profit motive built into these things, right? Cuba's biotech sector is 100% state-owned. There are currently 25 different vaccines that have qualified for late-stage trials. meaning they've basically passed all the other phases so far. 2 of those 25 come out of Cuba. One in particular shows enormous promise. It's called the Soberana 2. Now, this is advantageous for a lot of reasons. One, the Soberana 2 is old technology where it doesn't work the same as an mRNA vaccine. mRNA vaccines are relatively new vaccine technology developed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. The Soberana 2 takes a specific protein that comes off of the virus and it attaches to the spike protein, right? And what it does is when you inject it, it binds to the ACE2 receptors in your lungs and all over your body. And what it does very well is it blocks, it gives immunity that's better than our mRNA, all of them, vaccines against the original strain, but it's also shown to be 80 to 85% effective against Delta strain. It's supposed to be longer lasting. And here's the best part about it is that it's older tech. So there's more, we have more data that shows that it doesn't have like as much adverse reactions as potentially an mRNA vaccine would. They also inject you with what are called tetanus toxoid, which is a protein off of the tetanus bacteria that also binds the ACE2 receptors to create extra antibodies. So what they're finding out with the Soberana 2, which again developed in a communist medical system, is actually much safer, much more effective against all variants, and more longer lasting than anything that we have in America. So that's point number one. They have another one that's doing also very well. It's also going to the late stage trials. Second thing I'd like to talk about is what Franco was talking about with natural immunity. Now, I talked about on my show the ideal timeline for somebody if they want to avoid possible hospitalization and or morbidity, which means morbidity is like long-lasting scarring that's left over in your body after a bad infection, right? In my opinion, the best thing that could possibly happen to a person is that they got vaccinated with something that is older technology, that is able to elicit a good immune response that lasts a long time, i.e. the Cuban vaccine, and or you can make an argument for also the very old technology that they use in the Chinese and the Sputnik 5 Russian vaccine, also very well documented, less adverse reactions, right? So if you could run into the COVID virus in nature after you've gotten vaccinated with a relatively mild vaccine like what they're talking about in Cuba, then what will happen is that you have a less likely chance of ending up hospitalized, but you end up with natural immunity afterwards, which, as Franco was talking about, gives you orders of magnitude longer and stronger immunity against the viruses in nature, but also a lot of like cross immunity between variants. So, and they're even talking about now that you actually end up with if you do it the way that I just put out, where you get a light vaccine that prepares your immune system, and then you end up running into it in the wild, you end up with what's called hybrid immunity, which is almost better than natural immunity, where it's like you really get the whole bevy of protection against a lot of future variants. Now, that being said, since I'm a doctor, I'm for bodily autonomy. You can't force people to get any type of vaccine, regardless of whether or not it's been well documented as safe or not. It's all up to the individual. So it comes down to a risk assessment. Do you fear more being hospitalized by the Delta variant by running into it in nature with an unprepped immune system, or do you fear the vaccine, whatever that vaccine may be, more? So I always let the individual decide what they're going to do and try to educate them on vaccines. But like Franco says, the mRNA vaccines are relatively new tech, and they haven't been studied thoroughly and have not gone through phase 3 trials.
Yeah, and they only expose you to the spike protein, whereas the more traditional vaccines expose you to the virus, like the entire virus.
Right,
so
right. And that's what
immunity.
I think the Sputnik does that. It's an adenovirus. Right. And that has been shown to give you longer lasting immunity. So last point here, guys, Norway recently opened up entirely. They have achieved 67% immunity with their vaccine, but what they decided to do is like educate their populace on the vaccine and make sure that almost 100% of people who are at risk groups, i.e. the elderly and people with comorbidities, particularly the obese, which in Norway there's not a lot. In America there's quite a bit more. Make sure they're all well vaccinated, and then basically you reopen everything, and everybody that has a decent immune system that runs into now whatever variant happens to be there, they might get sick for a day or two, but every time they get sick, it only makes their immune system more and more immune in the future, more and more weaponized against future variants. So there's a combination of things that you can do. But my whole point on this whole thing is like, we can have a state-funded biotech sector and come up with even arguably much better technology and better vaccines than America is doing. But also, inevitably, this is going to become what's called endemic, I think. Meaning it becomes like the flu, where we just kind of have to deal with it. I don't see there being an end to COVID, and most experts would agree. So now the question is like, how is it going to wash over the populace? How many people are going to get sick, and how do we mitigate it? And my solution is always, let's do our best to make sure that the people that are at the highest risk get vaccinated, and then let everyone else decide for themselves after we educate them on their options. And that includes vaccines, and that includes ivermectin and other things.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that's not what but unfortunately, that's not what the mainstream is doing. That's not what politicians are doing. It's just like, everybody take it now. This is the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And then they don't cite you with evidence about that. Or they cherry pick evidence.
In the pocket of big pharma, so of course they're going to run the admin, and then the mainstream media that fawns over this admin. Also, they're going to run with that because there's tens of billions of dollars to be made by the people that they share a cocktail circuit with.
Yeah,
exactly.
And now
they didn't want to pay people early on to stay home and to stay within lockdowns, and they did that because they wanted to keep, they didn't care about the essential workers. They were really the expendable workers, we found out, and they pushed them to, back to work, and people out of desperation had to get back to work. And if they had just taken care of people early on, paid people to stay home, and
they would have been more trusting. Right.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah. But they say it's everybody, you're on your own, they just cast you aside, and then they rush this process of developing a vaccine, so it's always in favor of capital, is always the joining thread through all of it. It was early on when they pushed people back, out of lockdown because they didn't want to pay folks, and then it is now when they rush the process of developing a vaccine. I'll look more into the Soberana vaccine because I think that's great, and I definitely I like what's done in Cuba. They're one of the most like the number one most sustainable country on the planet, and it's I think it's a lot because of their socialist mechanisms that they have in place, or communist mechanisms. And so, yes, I think that we can all agree that the process of developing the vaccines was absolutely rushed, without a doubt. And that leads to a lot of skepticism and a lot of, us becoming the experimental, group who ends up having to. That's where they would be doing research studies to see what's the length of time that these vaccines stay, effective for. We were the case study for that. They as soon as they developed it, it was right out the door. And I think that rush was necessary because we had handled it so poorly so early on. We lost in a single day, or now 2 days. We lost more people than China, with 4 times the population, lost over the entire duration of the vaccine.
And that's because of it's a healthcare issue more than a virus issue.
Absolutely,
it's the structure of our system that caused all those deaths. Same thing with countries in the global south, like in the people who had the countries that had the highest number of deaths in South America was Peru and Brazil, and those are the countries that have the worst healthcare system there. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. So this is from my boy here, Steven Torres, said if the two options are take the vaccine or you can't work, you aren't freely given 2 options. You are represented with 2 options under duress. And then duress here is defined as duress describes the act of using force, coercion, threats, or psychological pressure, among other things, to get someone to act against their wishes. If a person is acting under duress, they are not acting of their own free will, and so may be treated accordingly in court proceedings. And then he gave me a link to this NBA this NBA discussion on ESPN, because there's a whole issue on the NBA. I don't know if you guys are viewers of sports, but I wanted to get your takes on this. What do you guys think of this?
I'll jump in really quick with one. I mean, option, he, Stephen Torres, talked about the option to work and free will and coercion. Most workers, if given the option, if it was truly an optional situation, would not be working where they work, right? Like most people do not like their jobs. They do it out of coercion already. We're coerced into work in the first place. And so I think that we should, look from that perspective as well, that, and that's what I'm talking about when I say if we had a proper social safety net, if people were taken care of, I think that most of us would take the option not to work regardless of any vaccine or anything like that. If we were really had an option, how many of us would be doing the jobs, these back-breaking, laboring jobs that pay less than a living wage? So many people making under $15 an hour. $15 an hour is a joke. That's not a dignified living wage. So given the option, I don't think any of us, most people wouldn't be working where they were working anyways if we really had an option. So I think look at that as far as coercion. We're coerced by a capitalist system, by a system that doesn't really take care of, the needs of the many. And so, that's what I would say as far as like having an option to work. And so, and then for disassociating, I believe in freedom of association with any organization. I'm a minarcho socialist, really. And, I just believe we should have the minimum size of the state as possible, and everything else, should be left up to an anarchistic way of relating to one another. And that comes along with that comes freedom of association, right? I should be able to freely associate or dissociate from any organization. And we do not have that freedom of association in this country. We will never have a freedom of association under a capitalist system, because they purposefully keep, the people desperate, and, so that they have to go in there and have to work. So that's my, my take on that.
Yeah, I don't believe that you're totally free if your job can be held against you if you don't put something in your body. That violates your personal liberty, and it violates your personal autonomy. I don't believe. I agree with your friend, Mr. Torres. That is correct. That is making a decision that is based on duress, meaning you have to do what we say. Otherwise, you may end up losing your job. You may ending up in a situation where you can't pay your bills. So are you really free to make your own choice on the vaccine? I don't think that qualifies. So I happen to agree there. But to your point, I also think you're right. If you have a shitty ass job that's making you, get the vaccine and you don't want to, just fucking quit. And everybody, this is kind of tangentially related. Everybody that lost their job during COVID, I'm one of those people. Millennials and Gen Z were exponentially harder impacted by job loss because of COVID. 1 out of 3 millennials lost their job at one point during COVID, and 1 out of 2 Gen Z. So my thing has always been on my show is like, if you lost your job due to COVID and you're a millennial or Gen Z, just don't go back to work. Let's start the general strike here by just keeping the people home that are already home because of this bogus stuff. And if you have a really crappy ass job, that's going to make you get the vaccine and you don't want to, just quit and don't go back. Don't go back to work at Amazon. Don't go back to work at Walmart. Like, everybody should just, in general, to your point, Kamali, is just like, let's refuse these shitty ass jobs that are forcing vaccinations on us to begin with. But that's, again, a slightly different point than the original one I made, which is like, I do agree that holding someone's job over their head as a sort of like bribe to get vaccinated, you're not a free person if that's the world we live in here, because you're really under coercion to get something put into your body that you would be in any other situation you would not get. So that's what I got to say about that.
Yeah,
I think in this country, I do believe that we mandate vaccines for children. I'm pretty sure you cannot put
it's different though, because you can't
vaccinated.
You can't go into. You can still go into restaurants, you can still go to bars and movie theaters.
For sure.
But that's what they're trying to do here in this case, and that's what they were testing out in New York, and I think California was in the initiation phase of trying to prevent people from going in unless they show proof of vaccination. And
it's like soft authoritarianism. It's
Yeah.
like it's more like incentivizing people to do what you want them to do and make them think that it's their own idea, but really all you're doing is just coercing and putting the entire unvaccinated community under duress to try to get them to do what you want. You're not doing it at knife point or at gunpoint, but you're setting up a situation where like people really don't have much of a choice involved with their own body.
Their life is still on the line if they can't pay. You already know if they can't put food on the table, and a lot of people
And
have
also,
families and all that.
yeah, and their social life is on the line because it'll be like, yeah, you can't go to movie theaters, you can't go to concerts, you can't go to anything, you can't go into any stores, which to some extent, like I'm for a mask mandate because masks actually do help prevent spread. But the vaccines, the vaccinated can still spread just fine. So this is just a weird way of like this Bidenite soft authoritarianism where it's like they're wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you do what we say and you'll have your life the way that you want it. But if you don't like it, and you don't want to put the vaccine in there, we're going to make your life very hellish and annoying and unbearable.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure that everyone's clear that I am not in favor of mandates on vaccine mandates. I do agree with Robert about the mask mandating. I do think that that's something that we can say is, you're not, having to alter your body in any way. This is just something that we're doing as a courtesy to our fellow citizens. And I think that it would feel much less authoritarian if it were something that we felt like we had collectively come together and decided as a community. I think that we'd feel a lot better about it. But I just want to make sure that everyone's clear that I am not in favor of mandating vaccines. I'm just saying that I want to live in a society. I think the problem stretches back closer to a root problem of people don't have the ability to freely associate and disassociate at work. And so, I do take issue with people being forced in that way. What I'd like to see is some private company, or, you get together collectively in some worker cooperative and the people, come to a consensus that they want to, make sure that everyone's vaccinated. Sure, that's great, but it doesn't work unless people have a true freedom to disassociate from their work, which unfortunately, to Robert's suggestion about, just quitting the job. I think that so many people, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. I just think that it's not a real, option possibility for so many
exactly
people.
And that's exactly our point, because now you don't have a choice. That's authoritarianism. So it's like, if that's the case, you can't quit. Then do you really have a choice as to what is going into your body? No, you don't. They're forcing you.
I wanted to give a shout out here to Jack Sith, who was on the show recently to talk about cryptocurrency and some things that is not well known to the public. But he's looking into the infrastructure bill that Bernie Sanders and the Senate is putting together. I'm going to have Shadowban Refugee on the show as well to discuss this. I know Ali Alexander and Seb Solomon, who I've had on the show to talk about the Medicare for All, the most recent bill. Like, I've had them on the show to discuss that, and they're looking into this as well. There's so many parts to this that we can have multiple episodes discussing this, but I wanted to highlight this one part here since it ties into what we were talking about. It ties into, the COVID stuff, and it ties into censorship. So in this section here, deficit neutral reserve fund relating to preventing tax increases on small businesses during a pandemic. So there's a part right here that says, which may include preventing tax increase on small businesses during any period in which a national emergency has been declared with respect to a pandemic by the amounts provided in such legislation for those purposes, provided that such legislation would not increase the okay, that's not the part I wanted to find. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. So there's multiple which may include. Okay, here it is. So deficit neutral reserve fund relating to COVID-19 vaccine administration and a public awareness. So right here it says which may include supporting states in implementing a transparent and consistent vaccine administration program and bolstering states' public awareness campaigns to increase awareness and knowledge of safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. There's another part, though, that I wanted to point out here. Let me try to find it here. This is so much. So, federal COVID-19 relief payments to a state or locality that imposes greater limits on the content of speech or restrictions on the religious exercise or beliefs of houses of worship and faith-based organizations described in Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 and exempt from taxation under Section 501A of such code. So they're limiting even like religious speech in this case. I want to get your thoughts on this. What do you guys think?
They're given tax breaks to people that go along with the narrative about vaccines and COVID that they want. And I don't know if you read that, but it said like the chairman of the budget committee has some say in this stuff. That's Bernie Sanders, by the way. Let's not forget.
He's pushing for it.
Right, exactly. So what that means is they're using Bernie as a vessel to push like vaccine information, and the narrative for Biden's admin and the mainstream media right now is thus: we need to vaccinate our way out of this. We need 95 to 100% vaccination rate, which by the way, any doctor will tell you that that doesn't matter. It depends on the vaccine. That you can't vaccinate your way out of this, especially if your vaccine is leaky, meaning anybody that's vaccinated can still transmit the virus. The smallpox vaccine worked because it was not leaky. Ours are. And it's sad to see, because that means that Bernie Sanders is essentially adopting a narrative that we're going to allow tax breaks, or we're not going to punish these entities as far as taxes go, so long as they acquiesce to the narrative that we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And if I may, just real quick, the solution is what you were talking about earlier, guys, is the solution is paying people to stay home, doing a 4 to 6 week lockdown, using the Defense Production Act to produce ventilators and masks the masks and testing kits that we could send to people's houses that fit really well. You know what I'm saying? And then you emerge after giving everybody $1,000 a week, $4,000 for a month or whatever, every person in America, we emerge ahead of COVID, and our health system would never be overwhelmed again, so long as we have a mask mandate afterwards. And then you don't have to do the vaccines. But the thing is, like we said, Joe Biden's not going to run with that narrative, because he's in the pockets of Big Pharma, who stands to make tens of millions of dollars off of the vaccine idea. And now it seems that they've co-opted Bernie Sanders into running with the same thing. And also, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, he might even allow some tax incentives for people that agree with us.
Yeah, the ventilators I wouldn't be in favor of, just because I know people close to me, like friends who've had their family members died because their lungs became dependent on the ventilators.
Did they?
And then they were fine. Yeah, they were fine after like a couple days, but then their lungs were just so used to the ventilators helping them that they died. And then we saw in New York also, Cuomo, when he implemented the ventilators in hospitals, a bunch of people died. A bunch of old people in nursery homes. So I wouldn't.
Yeah, that can't happen.
Yeah.
But what I mean is more like a general sense of use the Defense Production Act to produce anything that we would need to make.
Anything that can help prevent, with things that we know can help prevent, right? Like more implementing, educating people about vitamin D and how that can help them prevent, and vitamin C. Treatments that other countries are using, like ivermectin. Right, and
I've seen evidence that high dose zinc also helps reduce symptoms and longevity. And the idea should be like I think it was South Korea. What they did is they immediately sent masks and testing kits to every household in their country, and it was like, oh, then we know immediately who's sick and who's not, and then you do chain testing, and you make sure that anybody that they've been in contact with over the past couple of days, that you also isolate them. And then if we had 4 to 6 weeks to kind of organize and isolate the sick and then treat everybody and make sure our hospital system doesn't get overwhelmed again, then the numbers wouldn't go away, but they would drop tremendously. But again, you're not going to see that in America, because a lockdown would cause fucking riots. Oh, I can't go out to Steak and Shake. I ain't going to have that. We're going to go riot in the streets right now. But maybe that's what we really want,
Yeah, and to Robert's point there, I'll just say, just a reminder to everyone, the U.S. at very great cost, all right, to the public and the taxpayers, they store in large amounts in things they call the oil reserves, underground, massive amounts of oil, so that they can keep oil, gas prices low, essentially, or lowered for them, right? And so, at great cost to the public, the U.S. government, stores, and transports and stores, large amounts of oil, and they could just as easily choose to produce, to manufacture, that would give a lot of people jobs. You know, you could have some good paying jobs. We let all those factories close down so that we couldn't manufacture and spin up factories and manufacture things like masks, right? Like there are not enough of the N95 masks that I think that Robert's talking about there that really fit tightly to your face. You know, we didn't have enough of those, and that's why they started to come out. There was some, you know, poor information put out there, misinformation put out there early on about masks not being that important, because back then they were just trying to keep people, you know, as they said, just to keep people from panicking, because they knew that, yeah, it actually did slow the spread, and but they didn't have enough produced. And so we could have stored, we could have produced, and you could have manufactured, you know, transported and stored, you know, all the PPE that we needed to keep, you know, civilians safe, to keep nurses and doctors safe. We could have done all of that in you know, but what's the problem? It's not profitable, like Robert said. You know, that isn't profitable, and so there's no profit motive there. So these other private, you know, capitalist, corporations, they're not going to do that, and the U.S. government, they don't have enough lobbyists, you know, in favor of that. But they got, you know, fossil fuel lobbyists and all that sort of thing, and so they will, you know, they will go ahead and do that, and so. You know, and one other real quick thing, because I just remembered the point that I was trying to make way earlier when we were talking about, but we're talking about censorship and stuff, as far as that, you know, that thing was concerned with that, you know, censorship,
even religious speech,
tax, you know, thing, yeah, and. You know, the one of the things that the reasons why I think the U.S. government is you know, so happy to bring in that's, you know, the so-called whistleblower from Facebook, is that they also use it as leverage for political donations. You know, like they know that if the U.S. government is regulating these people, and they have regulatory power over people, then they can go in there and they can use that to leverage political campaign donations from those, you know, large corporations and such. And so that's how they end up in the pocket of big pharma and, you know, fossil fuel industry and all these different, you know, massive industries. And I think that we're just seeing that play out here as well. You know, that's who their donors are. You know, they're all in the same, you know, they're all, you know, at the same wine, you know, whatever, castle, whatever the fuck. Pete Buttigieg was there, you know, you know, so I think they all break bread together, and that's why you see them using this leverage for just more increased censorship, right?
Yeah, it's shock doctrine, man. Disaster capitalism 101. Never let a good pandemic go to waste, man. There's a lot of money to be made, so it doesn't. There's no profit motive in ending COVID.
Yeah.
Keep the fear going, right, so that we can take advantage of these people, right? And in addition to that, to what was happening during the lockdowns in 2020 was the protests, the BLM protests. People were advocating, a lot of people who were protesting were advocating for defunding the police. And a lot of people who support defunding the police still have an infatuation with Bernie Sanders. But here's Bernie Sanders pushing for this, and Section 3014, Deficit Neutral Reserve Fund relating to funding the police. This may include funding for law enforcement officer safety programs and fusion centers to protect the United States from domestic and international terrorists administered by the Department of Homeland Security, mental and behavioral health intervention programs administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, programs administered by the Department of Veterans Affairs to increase the hiring of military veterans as law enforcement officers. Don't a lot of these people have like PTSD?
Right.
So this is our progressive champion here. And for the record, I don't think the word progressive really means anything anymore. I don't call myself that. But yeah, your thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, I agree with that. Progressive has been run into the ground. It's an empty word. Look at the Progressive Caucus in the you know, House of Representatives there. I mean, it's a joke. It's a label that they can attach on because they know it's trendy. It's a good branding exercise for them. So yeah, that's absolute. You know, like anyone that uses that term to describe themselves, progress from what? I hate these relative terms anyways when describing like ideologies. It's like progress from where? You know, it's like this idea of like infinite growth, you know, like infinite progress. Like, well, progress from where and to where are you going? Like, what are you really trying to progress towards? So progressive's empty. And as far as like, you know, them finding all the different ways to increase funding to police, it's just, It's why I have very little hope left in electoralism and electoral politics at this stage, because they do this stuff for lip service. The people that we thought were the most progressive of all of these these politicians, look what they've done. They wear fancy dresses with nice slogans on them, but do absolutely nothing to alter the course and do anything substantive to change the everyday lives of just working class people wherever they may be. And so yes, they talked about defunding the police because it was good rhetoric to get them elected. And now that they're in power, what do? They give they increase funding to the Capitol Police to the tune of $1 billion, even though the Capitol Police were part and parcel of who was ushering folks in the door. There was no resistance. It's not like what we saw at BLM protests or anything. There was no hostility like that. These police to talk about using police for these kinds of services is absurd. We already see that police have way too many roles that we've thrown at police, and we just like to throw more money into policing. They have really good police unions. They're the only type of union I do not support, is police unions, and they are great lobbyists. They throw all kinds of money, and then they take on all these kinds of jobs, mental health crises, homelessness. We're sending police in to intervene in these problems. They by and large only escalate violence in those situations. All police that I've ever interacted with in my life have escalated violence in any situation that I've interacted with them in. So to send police into any kind of situation where people might be sick, might be hurting, might be desperate, I think is the worst solution, and is a reason why we cannot continue to put our faith and our trust and our time and our energy and our money behind politicians. It's really going to take a people's movement of getting together collectively in wherever we organize and wherever we have power, and using our voice in those spaces and collectively coming together and trying to build better systems. This is why I believe in dual power, building systems of dual power. In the wake of these crumbling institutions, we got to start to build up the institutions that we want to see replace them, so that we're not calling cops on people that are in the middle of a mental health crisis, or to do welfare checks on people. To the person on Twitter, you know who you are, that recently blocked me because you were trying to send cops to Rome's house.
Jeez.
Getting Twitter. Yeah, they
Oh
wanted
my
to
God.
get Twitter to get Rome's phone number. They wanted to report Rome's tweets so that they would get his phone, so that Twitter would give his phone number to cops and send cops to this black man's home while he was in the middle of a mental health crisis. And and so the idea that we would send cops to intervene in these situations. Cops shot a 13-year-old cute little autistic white boy. So if cops will shoot a cute little 13-year-old white kid, then just that's in mental health crisis. Imagine what they will do to a black person, an older male of any. Cops shoot white people. They shoot they kill white people. They kill black people. They kill It just happens to be disproportionate to black and indigenous people, but they kill more quantitatively white people because of the number of white folks in America. And so this is a problem that is a problem for all of us. And so we should all be behind a true defunding. I'm an abolitionist, and so we got to be really careful with these politicians
and increase the funding of mental health programs.
Exactly.
But also at the root of it, we got to dismantle the ruling class. Otherwise, we're going to get shit like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Robert, your take?
Yeah, the only reason that the police are becoming more militarized in this country is because the elites have no intention on changing their game plan, and they realize pretty soon they're going to need their own kind of bodyguard to defend them. And as for the progressives, I mean, is it progressive, as Kamali said, to vote for a $1.9 billion Capitol Police budget? Is it progressive to vote regularly to send money to Israel, as they've done twice? I don't know if you guys saw, they all voted in the exact correct way 5 days ago to put sanctions on Cambodia. They've all voted in. I mean, there's numerous times where they had a chance, the squad, the progressives, to stand up and actually stop something, but they don't. They're always sending money to, Israel and Saudi Arabia and whatever. So, anything that they say as far as being progressive, that's all just rhetoric. Now, as for Bernie Sanders, again, he's chair of the Senate Budget Committee. And when he was kind of standing for Biden, on the campaign trail, he wink, wink, nudge, nudge was talking about how because if you vote for Biden, I'll be head of the Senate Budget Committee, and what I can do is I might be able to hold some things hostage. I might be able to hold the military budget hostage, which that's a great idea, and he could hold that hostage if he wanted to get some concessions. But have we seen that? I haven't seen him hold anything hostage. So him getting that chair means absolutely nothing. So yeah, you're right. The term progressive is, what are they trying to rebrand it as now? The pragmatic progressives. That's essentially what it is. There are it's not progressives. It's just pragmatic progressives across the board, which is a nice way of saying, yeah, they're progressives in name, and they're going to not do shit for the people, and they're going to do what the neolibs want while giving lip service to the progressives that give them all their money to get them in office in the first place. So it's really scary, but as coming full circle, the reason that they are heavily funding the police and why Joe Biden is deliberately and kind of quietly trying to increase the spying state, the surveillance state, is because I don't think the elites have any intention of changing the capitalist system that we have, which is in its late stages. And they know that they're going to, in some form or fashion, they're going to need like a bodyguard to protect them when this shit gets so out of control that there inevitably is some sort of revolution. So just to finalize this point, the police budget in the United States would be the third largest military budget in the world. It's like almost 200 billion. I think it's between 150 and 200 billion. The only other two militaries in the world that are higher than that are the U.S. military and China's military. So, I mean, the amount of money we spend on policing in this country is out of this world. And of course, that contributes to systemic racism. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. But of course, if you've ever... I've just read Matt Taibbi's The Divide on my show, and that talks about how the system is basically rigged, and they bring out a whole bunch of these police officers who are essentially just bullies in high school to enforce these, racist ass laws and make sure that black and brown people end up caught up in the the prison industry complex, which gives them cheap labor and it allows them to completely oppress everybody in this country, and it's only going to get worse.
Exactly. I wanted to go back to this a little bit because I think that these points are really important to hit with the Facebook story. Just to get your thoughts on this, I saw these takes earlier today. This is Jesse Zerowell, also a member of the MCSC network, co-host of Facts on the Ground with Misty Winston. He said, "It's well within the realm of possibility, especially given the opaque post-offline explanations and assurances that Facebook shut itself down as a warning. Big tech is unaccountably omnipotent, and we can upend your lives whenever we want to. So best not to try to regulate us." So he highlighted here user data wasn't compromised according to the company, and that the company didn't specify what caused the initial networking issues. And there was a post here that I mentioned in the beginning of the stream that I wanted to get to. Ben Norton said, "What a coincidence that there are 0 U.S. politicians included in the Pandora Papers list of offshore bank accounts. I guess they're all pure and free from corruption. I'm sure this has nothing to do with the fact that the so-called leak was likely a hack by U.S. spy agencies." And then Wendy Seigelman said, "Where are the 336 politicians in the Pandora Papers from?" The U.S. is in white here. So that, and the lighter the color, the lower the number. It's 0. And Ben Norton said the group behind the Pandora Papers, ICIG, which left out all U.S. politicians, is funded by CIA Front Ford Foundation, NATO member Norway, Open Society of Billionaire Soros, longtime CIA asset, big tech oligarch Omidyar, who owns The Intercept, close ally of U.S. regime change ops, also works with Amazon. And then highlighting this part over here, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. So Washington, D.C. based international network of more than 200 investigative journalists and 100 media organizations in over 70 countries. So the journalists in Nicaragua that billionaire-funded ICIG org worked with on Pandora Papers are all U.S. government-funded anti-Sandinista activists. Carlos Fernando Chamorro is from the richest oligarch family. His right-wing propaganda rag, Confidential, is funded by the CIA's NED. There are 0 U.S. politicians in the Pandora Papers, but there are 1,200 Venezuelans. What a coincidence. ICIG had an enormous team of nearly 100 US-based journalists, but couldn't find any corrupt US politicians. I guess only foreign countries are corrupt. The US is completely perfect, guys, right? The goal of these right-wing opposition activists was to show how Venezuela found ways to get around illegal US sanctions and portray that as corruption, right? Which studies by the Center of Economic Policy Research shows that the US sanctions cost the lives of thousands of Venezuelans. That's not journalism. It's U.S. government-sponsored information warfare to justify a murderous blockade. So again, Facebook collaborating with the U.S. in manufacturing consent. The growing number of hack and dump ops, likely by the CIA or other spy agencies, is part of the U.S. empire's increasing use of lawfare. U.S. imperialists realize they can use anti-corruption as cover for destabilization campaigns like they did in Brazil. So there's some more here, but I want to get your thoughts on what we have so far here. Kamali and Robert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just like with the Facebook files, the Pandora Papers seems to ring a similar bell there. There's no criticism of the U.S. imperialism, but all the focus is put on these foreign countries. It's the otherism. The problems out there. It's one of these other people, and it's never us. It's never the organization. It's never the entity and the institutions that they have actual power, to change, that they are sitting there side by side with. No, it's never them. It's always someone else outside. They're the real danger. The Venezuelans, What is so unique about Venezuela? Well, they happen to sit on, the largest oil reserves in the entire, on the entire planet. And so they can, they want to do whatever they can. They also don't use the U.S. as their whatever it's called, the backup currency or whatever it is, and they're not, they're supposedly socialist, not my kind of socialism, but they are a brand of socialism. And like Lee Camp said, that's the trifecta right there. If you got 2 or 3 of those, you better be watching your back from the CIA. And if you meet 3 of those 3 requirements, the CIA is probably right behind you right now, about to stab your ass. Yesterday, you gotta watch out. Wherever they, wherever they have that, that overlap right there. You got oil that the U.S. wants. You got, you're not a capitalist, purely capitalist government. And you're not using the U.S. as your reserve currency. That's what it's called, your reserve currency. Then they see you as a threat to them, and they want to do whatever they can, regardless of how poor a country might be, how much that poverty is linked to U.S. sanctions and U.S. imperialism, which we actually do have voting power, in some really fake way here in the United States. But the places, that's why, even Noam Chomsky, who I have all the criticisms of in his later stages of life here, I love an earlier Noam, and he's somebody that I've read a lot of, and he always talked about why, people ask him, well, why don't you criticize Russia more, and why don't you criticize this and that, foreign government more? And he would always say, well, because I'm here in America, and this is where I have a deeper knowledge of, more power. I have voting power in this country. I can't affect those countries the same way that I can affect the U.S. And so, this is more CIA propaganda. We Nick from Fred Hampton Leftist was doing a show, I think today, talking about, and showing how the U.S. is the most propagandized, U.S. civilians are the most propagandized people, and a lot of places they'll look at it and they'll say, well, look at places like RT and Russia, state-run media. And the wild thing that, and which Noam Chomsky also points out, is that the thing about the U.S. is they don't need a so-called state-backed media. All the mainstream media organizations do their bidding without them.
They back the U.S.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like they don't even need to be so-called state-run. They're already doing the bidding of the U.S. government in these centralized sort of law enforcement agencies. And so, is this surprising to anyone at all? Certainly not surprising to me.
Robert, what's your
Yeah,
take?
yeah, me either. If you look at that map, you notice that the one of the most red countries is Russia.
Yeah.
So the CIA gets
Oh,
exactly what they want. They get to, they get to go, oh, well, McCarthyite smear, and the McCarthyism that we have
yeah.
nowadays is so much. It's so much more comprehensive than it was back in the day when it first started with Joe McCarthy. It's crazy, but you're right. Like that stinks to high heaven of a CIA op. We know that they want to sow misinformation. So what do? They censor under the guise that these are corrupt entities, whatever, which is exactly the opposite. And what they do is they just arbitrarily label whoever they deem as antithetical to their narrative as corruption, and then they put stuff like this out into the into the ether and hope it sticks, so that no one will believe these people when they actually come out with the truth. They do the same thing with domestic people. They do the same thing with lefties that do good journalism here. I mean, look at what happened with Julian Assange, Glenn Greenwald,
Hmm.
Ed Snowden. I mean, anybody that's antithetical or that challenges the CIA-driven narrative in any way, shape, or form, you can expect that they're going to put out, or they're going to pull every punch that they possibly can. And this is just further evidence of that. And of course, never miss an opportunity to blame Russia and China for something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And a little bit of Iran if they can, if they can get
Exactly.
them in there
Just
too,
throw it dark and
exactly.
just blame these people.
Their biggest threats.
Yeah.
I
See,
wanted to get to this story,
yeah.
before we get to like the final topic, because I saw this earlier today, and I'm surprised I didn't hear about it sooner. It says why TV and film workers just authorized one of the biggest strikes in Hollywood history. So there was over 90% of a vote for going on strike, and these workers that help give us our entertainment on TV and the movie theaters, they're not being paid well. They aren't given their basic needs. So more than 50,000 film and television workers voted to authorize a union strike this weekend, calling attention to exhausting working conditions in Hollywood and setting the stage for a massive potential shutdown of film and TV sets. They're not working. Some of those projects that Hollywood has planned, some of those TV shows that are supposed to be coming up, some of these movies that are set to be released in theaters, those are going to be delayed. So they got to come to an agreement with these workers. Are you going to increase their pay? Are you going to help them have reach their basic needs, or are you just going to risk it all and delay these projects and just get desperate people? Good luck with that. Like here you have an agreement of all these workers striking, and as they see these streaming services that like we have Disney now, Netflix, HBO, which is owned by Time Warner, they're making a lot of money, and it's not fair to see this ratio, this proportion of these CEOs and people at the top getting, what is it now, like thousands of times richer than the working class, when it back in the 80s was like 20 times. But yeah, this was exacerbated by the pandemic and a streaming era in which a demand for content has skyrocketed, right? They're banking in on that streaming money. So what are your thoughts on this, guys? You think that they're gonna, you think
I
that
think
they're
it's
going
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
but do you think that the people at the top, like these execs, that they're going to give the people the pay that they need?
I think that if these workers understand exactly how invaluable they are and hold out, and exactly what kind of commodity that they're holding hostage, Americans love their entertainment. All you'd have to do is say, we're never making another Marvel movie again. None
I
of us
was
are
gonna
going to
say
work on a
that.
Marvel movie
Oh my
again.
god, if
And
they
it'd be
say that, I'm
like,
gonna get
there will
so
be
mad.
literally, and then what would happen is you go
Yeah,
public with that, be like, we're not working on any more Marvel movies until our corporate overlords start paying us the way
yeah,
that we want. And here's what we want: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it's non-negotiable. If you want any more Marvel movies, you have to listen to us. So I hope they understand the leverage that they have, because Americans are addicted to their entertainment. So they do have a very large bargaining chip. It's just a matter of how resolute they are in their negotiations. If I were them, I would just say that, like, we're just like, you forget about any future blockbusters. You guys want to make $1 billion on an Avengers Endgame movie ever again?
You guys were excited about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and Thor: Love and Thunder. Well, it's going to be delayed because the workers aren't being paid right.
Exactly.
And
right.
I would be standing with the workers. I'll be like, give us these Marvel movies that I love by paying these people what they need. I'm not going to be mad at the workers for striking. I'm going to be mad at the studios for not giving them the money that they need.
Exactly right. And as long as their PR and is correct, and they go out and make sure that everybody understands that's what they're doing, they have an immense bargaining chip to get what they need. And I hope they do it. I stand in solidarity with them, but they need to understand they don't need to settle for crumbs. Americans are addicted to their Marvel movies, so all you got to do is hold it hostage, and as long as you're willing to, hold out,
they can make really big demands.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this strike is coming right up against, there is an October 15th general strike planned. I know there will be, there are more general strikes, planned after that, but this is the first. This would be the first general strike in the United States in pretty much a century. They used to happen, we used to have, a stronger labor unions. We used to have a strong, socialist, communist parties in this country about 100 years ago now. And through Red Scare and McCarthyism, they slowly chipped away at that, and capitalists with all the power and money and incentive tore down labor unions little by little, and so we now see we've dropped from over 30% union participation to under 10%, and most of those are now in the public sector at this stage. So it's one of the reasons why I continue to advocate for workplace democracy, because I just don't think that you can't leave the capitalists with all that surplus, with all that power, with all the incentive, because they will slowly, whatever gains we make through labor unions, they will slowly but surely chip away at those over time. But I do support labor unions. It's at least a good stopgap for me, and I am absolutely, like Robert said, and Franco, 100% in solidarity with these striking workers. I hope that this, it happens, right in with the general strike, and I hope more folks join in. I want to see more striking workers from more industries. I think that another one, especially in entertainment industries, because that gets to people. When people, Americans love their entertainment, particularly in the USA, but all around the world. But Americans love their entertainment, right? And so it's like, video game industry, that all the terrible labor practices that they have in the video game industry. Like,
I've heard horror stories.
Oh, yeah, it's so
people in the special effects, behind the scenes with the special effects.
Absolutely.
Long
even
hours.
The QA testers and but all the developers, the designers, there's this culture where they like to exploit, and this is happening in the film industry as well, is they exploit, and it happens to other things, teachers, nurses, they exploit your passion for something, right? They know that capitalists will know that you're passionate about something, know that you care about something, and they will use that to exploit you even further. So they know that, video game developers, these film, crew workers, they're movie bust themselves, they're video game enthusiasts themselves, right? Teachers care about their students, nurses care about their patients, right? So especially in the case of the teachers and stuff, and medical workers, particularly below nurses, they use that passion, that care that you have, and they use that to try to make you consider that a part of your wage, right? And so people want to like work extra hours, work longer hours to get the thing done, and they put all these kinds of, like, in the video game industry, there's this concept of crunch, and what they describe in the film industry sounds a lot like that, even though they don't have the same term for it. Some of these workers were talking about working, for 10, 15 hours with 12, 15 hours a day with no lunch breaks, 40 days straight, no lunch breaks, no kind of no rest breaks, having to drive, feeling intoxicated, driving home, almost going to, can harm themselves. And so as far as if and this is one other thing I'll add, when Scarlett Johansson came out recently and, made all that, big thing about not getting the streaming revenue. One of the things that they're asking for here is bigger cut of the streaming revenue. And I think that is what she was talking about, was really just this, like, elitist. The workers that get, I mean, the actors that get a cut of the revenues from the theaters and such, they are already the top tier actors, right? They're the only ones that are getting a significant cut of that revenue. They're multimillionaires already. They don't need more money. The people that need more money are the everyday workers that are showing up that are making this happen. And just like we found out with essential workers in the pandemic, when these workers go on strike, we're going to find out who the real essential workers are in the film industry. And it's not so much the people that we're just seeing and the actors and the executive producers and all these sort of people. The people that really make this stuff happen on a day-to-day basis are these crew workers. And so I love what they're doing here. Support it 100%. Hope to see this successful. Hope they get every demand met before they ever go back. And I hope that this joins forces with a larger general strike so that we can really see some folks bend to our will, because I think that's the only way we're going to see any real policy changes in this country, because leaving it up to politicians and asking them and begging them to do what we ask is just it's a lost cause at this stage.
That's how it's got to be, man. Coalescing all these movements together. Yeah.
Crushed.
Final topic here that I want to talk to you guys about is one that was brought up a little bit before the show, and I don't think I have to mention too much to this community about how there's been some drama that's occurred in some networks. It's unfortunate to see, but it leads to a conversation of how should networks be structured. And I think both of you guys, before we started the stream, brought up good points. I'm sort of just going to sit and comment on some of the things that you guys say, take a bit of a moderator status here. But who wants to start here with that discussion? What do you guys envision is the best way that independent media channels should structure themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first if you want.
Yeah.
As you guys know, kind of my philosophy is that we do a lot of smaller networks that don't try to bring all the networks together under an umbrella. Now, that doesn't mean that I exclude that idea. I want both. I want, ideally, the best way I see for us to take out the TYTs and the David Doles and the Mike Figueredos of the world is kind of in a Marxian style co-opt. And the way that I see it is that we don't have any centralized leadership, and we all create our own channels and kind of bounce off of each other's channels and cross-pollinate. And I didn't make this stuff up. I already saw it happening, and I kind of just name. We're
killing it with the collaborations.
Right. Yeah. And what you do with this is that if you pump each other, but also kind of self-correct in a way that I do on my show, is that you'd have an entity that is made up of hundreds or maybe even eventually thousands of channels that bounce off of each other and kind of keep an eye on each other in a way so that we make sure we fact check each other. And so what I like to do is my recommendation for the channel that you're talking about, I talk to them regularly. I've been on their show multiple times, and I commend them for how they handled their recent drama that they had. They did it in a very humane and wonderful way that is going to, I think, help them in the future rather than hurt them. Is that those channels that are run by 5 or 6 or maybe even as many as 10 people, those should be hubs that we come together for and have like roundtables, and then they're run by a select handful of people that maybe do their own content on that channel, but they have guests come in and they give them platforms, and then the people that are on these channels also do some work on the side. The Gray Zone does this. For instance, like the Gray Zone it's Blumenthal and Anya Parampil and Aaron Mate and Ben Norton, and they all upload stuff to the Gray Zone, but then all of those people have their own channels. Max Blumenthal has Foreign Agents, Ben Norton has Propaganda Today, Aaron Mate has Pushback, right? And so my idea is that nobody has all of their work consolidated to one single hub, and they do their own stuff on the side, so that if there ever happens to be disagreement on where a channel goes in terms of like the content you're putting out, or even just the overall vision for what you want for the channel, if you guys butt heads, then it doesn't become so inherently dramatic, because you can just go, oh, well, we can agree to disagree. I'm going to do my own thing for a little bit here, and then I'll come back and, bounce off of this channel when I need to. But again, it's not antithetical to the idea of Political Fight Club to have those collection channels that have 5 or 6 people running them and that are constantly doing roundtables and getting 5, 6, 7, 10 people on there at once. But I also want to see people, and I want to encourage people that aren't currently in the YouTube sphere to do their own. And I've proven, if anything, I've proven with Political Fight Club is that all you really need is an iPhone and some good takes.
That's
And
how I started.
and some people will listen to you. So what I want to do is bring as many people into this as possible and network with no real centralized leadership. But again, Kamali, I'm not at all against the model of the channel that we're talking about right now. I think that's absolutely necessary to what I'm talking about. But go ahead, lay it out. Paint me a word picture.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think that we're all friends of of the folks over there. We've all comrades, absolutely, really love, respect all of them, and appreciate what they how they handled the situation swiftly and restored justice in that case. And so all that is commendable. Really, what we're talking about here is just how we as leftists, media, entities moving forward, how we can use this as a learning lesson to try to build better structures so that we can, the justice isn't just restorative, but transformative, right? So that we can change the systems, so we can build better systems, so that we don't end up like the next TYT. Because I think that TYT, is an institution, an organization that started out with probably, with some solid ideas. I mean, I used to watch TYT back in the day. It's how I crossed along my political journey. They were a stepping stone along that political journey to the true left. And so I think that they may have gone in with all the best intentions, although we know the head of TYT is pro-capitalist. Cenk Uygur says that he's a capitalist himself. He believes he is pro-capitalist. And so I think that as socialists, as leftists, we need to think about the way that we relate to one another. And so I just think that my model and what I would recommend for folks is I do support anyone that wants to do a channel on their own, because one, it's just easier, typically to start out that way. Especially I think that when you're starting out, it's not like you're going to be able to amass a group of people that are willing to like get together and commit to this work in that way. It's very tough, so folks starting out on their own, I think, is really admirable and want to be encouraged. Everybody should put their voice out there and deserves to be heard. No one person more than any other. And so, but the real model that I think moving forward that we need to start to look after, and because and the reason I talk about this and I'm such a strong advocate for this is because I think that the real power that we have in independent left media is not necessarily in what we're talking about every day. I think in the same way that we were talking about these folks that are like pointing fingers outside at the foreign places, and how the U.S. government always wants to do that in these institutions. Our media, mainstream media, wants to point the finger outward at the outside things, the factors that they don't have as much control over. Those things are important to discuss. We need platforms. We need people that are discussing that. That's the way that we pull people over to our side. So we absolutely need to be talking about the news of the day, the political commentary. We got to be talking about these hot button issues, and we should definitely be doing that. But I think that the real revolutionary change that we can make is in the way that we organize ourselves. Because as socialists, as leftists, I think that we need to do everything that we can to sort of push back against any kind of hierarchical structuring or anything like that, but also to try to build community, right? And to try to be in community with one another. And one of the things that I think that the independent left media space will be lacking if we do too many individual organizations and not having larger organizations is a lack of labor power, right? We don't really have we'll be in community, we can collaborate all we want, but we don't really have any significant labor power when we're all our own individual bosses per se, and we're not coordinated in that way, right? When there isn't as much coordination and cooperation as we would like to see. And so I think that the way that I would like to see people relate is to, yes, build networks, because I think that the only way that we're going to compete with and really take down a TYT, to be honest, and because we need a replacement for TYT, and this is about building dual power and building up the institution that we'd like to see replace TYT. And I think that we can start to do that, with networks like MCSC and, Fred Hampton Leftists and these other collective groups. There is power in collectivism, right? There's power in community and in collectivism. And what I'd like to see out of it is just a model of democracy that is certainly not minoritarian like what we have in the United States government, not majoritarian like we see in what most people are sort of typically used to. It's like, majority vote, if 50% of the people plus one, votes in favor of a measure, then that measure passes, even if that leaves 49% of people with a bad taste in their mouth, not feeling good about the decision. And I think that that's the problem that we always meet up with majoritarian democracy. So the real democracy that I'd like to see established inside of these worker cooperatives, these collectives, is a model of democratic consensus. And that model of democratic consensus pretty much says we do not move forward with a proposal or a measure. Not everybody doesn't have to agree on it, but nobody can outright disagree on it. Nobody can absolutely reject this proposal, and we move forward. So democratic consensus requires that you find consensus among that. That typically, it works in smaller groups. Less than about 15 to 20 people, typically within a sort of democratic consensus, and then you have sort of groups that then join together and use like a model of confederalism, where they then meet. Find consensus amongst themselves, and then send representatives up to another organization to then find consensus among the larger body, right? And in consensus, every single person gets to have their voice heard. Any single person can block a measure from going forward, and that I think avoids a lot of the issues where sometimes only one person out of 100 is right on an issue, and if that one person out of 100 is right, they should, and they feel strongly about it, they should have the power to stop something bad from happening. And so I think that would have benefited, in this case, but not even focusing on this one case, I think that it would benefit all the networks we sort of are a part of. And in doing so, I think that we set an example for people moving forward of how to build, post-capitalist structures, because it's hard work to do. It's slower. Finding consensus is a slower process. But you know what? Like, having the capitalist hierarchical majoritarian democracies may be a little bit faster, but we've seen where that has brought us, and sometimes that so-called efficiency isn't always so efficient, like we were just talking about in the case of the vaccine development, and the rush to do something isn't always what is most effective and most safe for everyone else. So what I'd like to see is a model of democratic consensus. I urge everyone to to look into it, to check it out, to learn how it works. First thing that it requires is everybody to understand the process, and it's just a process whereby everyone can voice their concerns, can voice their reservations, or can outright block a measure from happening. And until you have to continue to just do the work of convincing people, informing people, and until people feel properly informed on any measure, on any proposal from passing, they have to be not in the position of blocking it, which every single member has the right to do. And so it prevents, it gives everybody that same veto power, and prevents a sort of majority rule, the tyranny of the majority, as they like to try to, say from minoritarian democracies, they like to use the fear of tyranny of the majority. But really, there is a tyranny of the majority when sometimes you can have factions developed within democratic institutions. And if you just build a large enough faction, for instance, in America, right, you pretty much under majority democracy, as long as all white people agree to something, in majority democracy, they can move forward with those measures. The minority voices are not heard out, right? They don't need to be heard out. They don't need them. And that's why Joe Biden can tell you that you ain't black if you don't vote for Joe Biden, and he doesn't give a damn because there's no sweat off of his back, because he just got to convince enough white folks, and just get enough of them on board, or just scare you with, well, what are you going to do? Go vote for them. But under democratic consensus, it says that even if one person, a minority person, if there's only one woman in an organization, or one, queer person, or whatever the case might be, or just one person that is on the right side of history, that person's voice can be properly heard out. They can voice their objections, and until they are convinced, if we do consensus in things like even on our criminal court, in criminal juries, you have to reach consensus on a verdict, or else the verdict doesn't pass, right? It has to be unanimous. And so it doesn't mean that everyone necessarily agrees with something. You can voice your reservations. You can also say, I stand aside, meaning I'm not going to help implement this thing, but I'm also not going to block it. And I think that it's the model that we could all benefit from moving forward in developing these sort of democratic institutions. And then I think that we would avoid the shit that TYT got into with their union busting and all that BS. It's not about coming up with rules to or controlling people's speech. You're not going to be voting on measures like that. It's not like some survivor-esque thing, like voting people off the island or anything like that. You first and foremost develop a constitution through democratic consensus, where you lay out all the rules of associating with this organization, and it allows people the freedom to associate and dissociate. If you find yourself blocking measure after measure, then you just disassociate. You can freely disassociate from this organization and you get out of there. And so I think that that's the model that I really like to see moving forward. And I really am just, trying to go out there and do the work to try to, help, as many people and push as many people to learn about it. A great video by Saint Andrewism on YouTube and postmodernism. I think I'll have to find who the second guy is. It's not postmodernism. Sorry. It's like post comprehension or something like that. But yeah, check out Saint Andrewism's video on democratic consensus, and I think it'll give you a good, strong, solid understanding. And it's the model of democracy I'd like to see implemented on the left moving forward.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I like how the way things are heading right now. Like we are, like right now, TYT's views are so low. Like they're becoming so irrelevant. People are hungry for fresher voices, like like ours. And right now, the way things are structured, there's the channels are decentralized. Right, people are coming out. You have more freedom as an individual to make choices for what you want for your channel. With the MCSC network, it's like if you get some benefits in terms of like there's more developed channels that can help promote you more based on the association. They can give you some advice, some tips, and sometimes resources, interview recommendations, and all that. So there can be some benefit. There are benefits to forming networks, but as it's going right now, I think things are naturally panning out like how they should be. Yeah, Robert, what were you going to say?
Yeah, and I'm not against that whatsoever. Again, I think that we can do both, and I think we have to do both. And whatever, if you're out there listening right now, whatever you want for your channel, just do that. If you want to do it with a buddy, as you guys know, I have a friend who I have on regularly who I just debate with about whatever. So I think we need to do both. And in fact, I am in the works right now talking with some people behind the scenes on another network that we're going to kind of create, and I'm going to be doing my own show, Political Fight Club, on the side, but then I'm also going to be doing a show for them. So I definitely am not against that whatsoever. And I think we absolutely have to do both. And I do appreciate what you did, Kamali. I saw you reach out to the Fred Hampton leftists on Twitter. I read your the letter you wrote to them. I think that's wonderful. And you're right. They only ran into this because they didn't quite have like a constitutional structure on how to deal with it. But they're learning, and they learned their lesson. And I think now if they adopt what you recommended, they won't have this issue whatsoever. So, and I think they're going to be much stronger coming through this than they were even beforehand. But yeah, I would love to see nothing but whatever kind of channel. If you're a lefty out there and you have a voice, do whatever style you want to do. And then what we'll all do is collaborate behind the scenes. And in fact, I am going to be, without a doubt, joining a channel here pretty soon. We'll see what happens. I'll let you guys know. But there's some decently big names that are thinking about doing something similar to Mikasa Sukasa or Fred Hampton leftists right now. And like I said, I think word on the street is that Compton Jay is going to also kind of branch out and do his own network called the Populist Voice Network. So he's going to be like one of the OGs at Fred Hampton leftists, but also doing his own show, which is also springboarding other people. Yeah. So it's like, dude, let's not pigeonhole ourselves whatsoever. Let's create this hive mind of lefties that will kind of progress the narrative that we all kind of more or less agree on anyway. We'll self-correct through what I always do is like diss tracks, where like if something is really incorrect in one of my comrades' videos, I will respond to it publicly. But beyond that, man, let's not handicap ourselves in any way possible, man.
Depending on what it is too, because we can also reach out to each other privately and talk about it rather than sometimes making a video and then the other person may take too much offense. It's like, why didn't you just hit me up, man?
But I also think that you break the algorithm by conjuring up drama, and that's the only reason I do it is because the algorithm is so against it. And I figure if there's one trick to beating the algorithm, it's like that you conjure up some sort of fight and drop a diss track. But like Jimmy Dore proved that with TOIT. It's like, occasionally you gotta like conjure up a little bit of drama, otherwise you end up like Status Quo, where everything is like very boring and the views never go up, even though technically the journalism they're doing is very good. Americans like their entertainment, so that's part of Fight Club as well as like the occasional diss track. And remember, I've only ever corrected other lefties like twice, I think I've gone after the Vanguard once on the ivermectin thing, and I mean, other than that, I called Jackson Hinkle's last debate with Dylan Burns like really, really. I don't know if you guys saw it. They were screaming at each other. I was like, this is just kind of childish. So I called out Jackson on that one. But other than that, the only people I regularly go after are like the too far gones. I go after TYT regularly. I went after Tim Black hardcore after he blamed all of the lefty YouTubers for Nina Turner's loss. And again, I see that as a battle worth fighting publicly. And then what I do,
it's punching up, so it doesn't look bad, right?
And there's a weird thing that happens, guys. Like, you can have a conversation on a panel, and because you are face-to-face, so to speak, with people, sometimes you don't always get their exact honest take. The diss track that I do, it allows you a certain amount of distance, and in a way, you let the people decide. The way that you see when, like, you know, Eminem is beefing with Machine Gun Kelly, you let the viewers decide which video is correct and let them decide, for all intents and purposes, who's right on the substance. So you almost leave it up to the people in a way. But yeah, you're right. I don't go looking for trouble, especially on things that I don't think are worth picking a fight over. And of course, I talk to people behind the scenes. And as you guys can tell, I would never get combative with either of you because I know you're good faith actors. The only people I go after are bad faith actors who are using bogus arguments, and I shine the world's biggest spotlight on the circus that they're putting on in front of me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think anybody's beyond reproach, and we should all be welcoming and inviting of criticism when we exactly. It's like when if I make missteps, we're human, right? We're all human. We're gonna have some bad takes. Everybody is liable to have at least a few bad takes along the way, and we're doing a disservice if we're not trying to reach out in community and try to correct those, try to help people, just through discussion and healthy debate, not necessarily devolving to the whatever happened with Jackson there on his show, which I'm not trying to pick on Jackson or anything like that.
No, he was fine on the substance. He just they were yelling at each other so much for 2.5 hours.
There's a lot to talk about there.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not getting a lot of value, which can be the problem with like debates and like that whole world and realm of like online red tube sort of like the debate bro kind of thing, and so I just think that working cooperatively doesn't mean without criticism, without constructive critique of another person. And so we can collaborate, we can cooperate, but we should also critique each other when the time comes. If we have a bad take, somebody that I really admire recently had some terrible takes, Alexis Giondi. I have her book right behind me, and she has some terrible takes on like some anti-China stuff, and it was just just straight up U.S. imperialism, and you got to be able to critique those folks. Even Cornel West, he was a pro Joe Biden kind of vote and then move him left afterward, push him to the left afterward. Noam Chomsky, these people are not beyond reproach. Nobody is should be heroicized in that way or anything like that. But I think that we can do that without having to necessarily compete, because the reality is of this space is that we are sadly, without even wanting to, having to compete for people's time and in their attention. And so if we tie together our economic futures a little bit tighter, I think that then we all benefit from these discussions that we have from each other, working in some sort of like Confederate type model where all of us are contributing a few percentage of our revenue to a centralized fund, where we then democratically, through democratic consensus, get together and decide what we do with that mutual aid, whatever it might be, or helping each other build up something better. I think that we all stand to benefit from that, and give people that are not known right now a chance to come up and rise up. And so I think that, and like you said, also one size does not fit all. We need a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, this sounds to me like the golden age of hip hop. Like when there were a lot of rappers that were. It was decentralized, right? There's a bunch of different rappers that were coming out, and then sometimes some of these rappers would form an alliance. They'd form a group together, and then we got so many classic albums during that time, and the common goal there was to entertain people with lyricism and great production and all that. Here, our common goal is what?
So many.
Did you guys ever see the movie The Warriors? Like at the beginning, where Cyrus is trying to unite all the gangs to take down the oppressive police force.
No, but I should now.
You should watch it, man. You'll like it a lot. And then that first part, he's got 100 different gangs with 5 or 6 different members from each gang, all in the big crowd. And he goes, "Listen up, guys. We can either unite and start working through this together, and we have the numbers to destroy the oppressive system we have in front of us, or we can die as individual gangs. So what we can do is either survive or die. We can survive together or die as individuals, and I'm 100% for that first thing. Even the Crips and the Bloods decided to put their grievances aside when it came down to the police brutality thing. They were like on the same side of like standing up to the police. If they can put their grievances aside and unite and against an oppressor, I think all of us absolutely can.
Put our
And I
differences
think that's
aside.
what got Fred Hampton assassinated. Essentially, was the fact that he was, they were afraid. They saw him uniting gangs like that, and uniting, building that Rainbow Coalition, helping to unite people from the Latino, Black, white, wherever, immigrant, native, just people were uniting across the one color we all share in common, which is green, and the lack thereof. And so we can all unite behind that. And so I think that's a real fear of the ruling class, is to see poor people getting together in unity and in solidarity.
That's their true fear.
Exactly. Like, for us to take their power away. But also, we got to make sure that once we get there, we're actually going to be better than them. We're going to be more compassionate. Our consciousness is going to be higher, so that the same mistake does not happen again.
One of the rules of Fight Club, the 7th rule of Fight Club is you cannot become corrupt or don't take any donations that are like corporate donations. I just call it don't sell out is the rule. And one of the other rules is admit when you're wrong. And all of the lefties seem pretty good about, like, if they have a bad take, usually they come out and they're like, oh, you know what, my subs talked to me. I had other people that were close to me that do other channels talk to me about this bad take. And a lot of them, the Fred Hampton leftists included, they admit they're wrong, and it makes you look, I mean, you're human. We're all human, right? So there's no reason for your listeners to stop listening to you simply because you make a mistake here or there, so long as you don't double down on that mistake. So that's and I don't. Part of the reason I created Political Fight Club is I saw this unbelievably scary trend where all of the people that got me into politics to begin with in terms of YouTube all shifted towards the corporate side, and that includes everybody I've named tonight, including also Kyle Kalinske to a large extent as well. And it broke my heart to see them all sell out. So I'm trying to put into place like a fail-safe that makes sure that future YouTubers that are coming out of the woodwork don't go that same direction and realize they can be part of this beautiful, awesome, huge network that consumes those sellouts.
And that's what my whole this whole trying to build a new structure, that's what transformative justice is all about, and trying to build new structures, new systems, so that we don't commit the same mistakes. I'm sure a lot of these people went in with the best of intentions, thinking that they were going to be the seeds of revolution, and slowly but surely, they shift over, little by little over to, the side of reformation, and they're no longer revolutionaries, and they just get sort of absorbed into the systems. You don't change systems change you. That's why we got to build up our own systems from the ground up. We can't rely on trying to change the political system in that way. We just got to build the new one and let the other one crumble around us, because the American empire is crumbling right now. And so we just got to build up the infrastructure, and that's what dual power is all about.
And don't be afraid to let your viewers and other YouTubers critique you in a way, especially if you make a mistake, because a lot of these people, they double down and then they end up, they go super corporate, and then they never listen to their viewers in trying to learn and be introspective and correct their rhetoric. So their channels end up going kind of like, they lose a lot of subs, they lose a lot of views and whatever. So if you allow yourself, and nobody's beyond reproach, if you allow yourself some critique, we can all move forward together. And that way, if anybody starts going down that path, the rest of us will dogpile them and be like, what the hell? Your rhetoric is suddenly so weird. Like, are you taking money suddenly? Like, what the hell's going on? And we would catch it. The rest of the net would catch those people that are starting to go down that road. And if I had my way, if they can't stop going down that road, then they would just simply kind of be ostracized the way that TYT is. And then their channel would more or less, they would just die.
It's becoming irrelevant.
Right, exactly. And that's okay with me, because I don't want people that are putting out bad information, who are McCarthyite smearing, slandering people like Aaron Mate for no reason. I don't agree with that behavior. So therefore, I would love to see a network that keeps each other in check. And if we have hundreds of us, eventually what would happen is everybody would be so they'd be very receptive to bad takes, because there'd be so many other people that, in concern of their, you know, well-being and their future, would go, listen, man, why are you talking about stuff so
After people's experience with Bernie and AOC, and now like with Tulsi, people are waiting to catch, you know, all these personalities on independent media slipping up. They're like, hold up, you're not being consistent here. Like, people are they're more vigilant now on whether they're being misguided. I wanted to add on to something here that Shadowban said. Personalities, in my opinion, are distractions from the issues. It should be about the reasons for why you like the personalities, right? It should be about the ideas, the information that they're bringing, how objective they're being in their analysis. That's what it should be, and on the information that's being presented. But yeah, don't idolize anybody. It should be about the issues.
Cult of celebrity has no place on the left. We have to destroy any sort of cult of celebrity here on the left. And I'm telling, like, I have a list of research topics that I have right now. I've been writing down. You've seen me looking down and jotting stuff all night. That from, you know, information from that Franco and Robert have shared here. Like, this is what we disagree. We didn't agree on everything, you know, but what we disagreed on gives me room to, you know, and all of us room to grow, to learn, to try to do better research, to learn more. I got a whole ton of things, lists of stuff. Like, look at this, you know, just papers worth of stuff to go and research and find out more about, because this is what, you know, we should all be, you know, we got to build up our media literacy, and we should be excited to learn new things and have our positions and our ideas challenged. That's what makes us stronger, you know, all, you know, cooperatively and collectively. So I love doing stuff like this and talking with people that I don't agree with on everything. You know, we shouldn't all surround ourselves in bubbles like that. It's really good and you know, to challenge ourselves in this way. So thank you to both of you for that.
Yeah, I had a blast. I just want to refute something over here. Cult of a personality has no place anywhere. There's a place for me to have my own cult where I'm the only member for my wife. I simp for her. So if you got a problem with that, Shadowban, I don't know. We got to let's throw some hands. I'm just playing. It's all love, man. But yeah, guys, thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate you guys' takes. You guys want to leave the people with any final message, any shout outs, where people can find you?
After you first. Okay. You can find me Radical Democracy Show on YouTube. I've been on a bit of a hiatus recently. Just had some health issues that I had to deal with, and financial stuff. Having to try to get a job in this capitalist system, it's not easy. So I had to step away, and also just trying to rethink and how I want to do the channel, just structuring the channel and everything. And so we'll be back soon. So please sub to the channel. You check me out on YouTube. The handle's right there. Onto the 5th. And just keep doing the good work. October 15th general strike. October 15th, learn about it, participate.
Yeah, dude, I love you guys. Franco, thanks again for having me, man. I'm a huge fan of your work, so it's been a real honor to talk to you guys. And of course, we didn't get at each other's throats. We disagree on things, but this is how proper debate works. And this is the difference between us and TYT, right? And we're showing it right now. As far as plugging goes, you can find me on YouTube, Robert Durden, just the way it's displayed. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob_Buechner, B as in boy, UECHNER. That's my real name. And as of today, I'm on Rockfin. I just got approved yesterday. So I'm on Rockfin, and I'm actually on Rumble as well as of a couple of days ago. I'm petrified of the YouTube apocalypse. Censoring, so I'm diversifying, and I'm super happy to be on Rockfin, so you guys can find me on there as well. I'm going to start kind of slowly transferring my stuff to those two platforms here in the future, though until they censor me, I'm going to keep putting up on YouTube as well. But I want to thank you guys. It's been a real pleasure, guys.
Awesome. Had a blast. Thought it was an amazing show. Robert and Kamali, I look forward to having you guys on again for future collaborations. And everybody else, don't forget, as always, you're not alone. And I know you'll stay informed. Take care, everybody.
Yep. See ya.
Thanks, Franco. Thanks,